I know what you're thinking. This sounds like some twisted soap opera, right? Well, buckle up, because this is my actual life, and it gets so much worse than you could ever imagine. My younger brother David has always harbored a deep-seated resentment towards me. If you think it stemmed from jealousy, you'd be wrong. He was the favored child, not me. There was absolutely no reason for him to be envious, yet he made my existence a living nightmare. To give you some context, our mother always indulged David. He was the golden child of our family. She cooked his meals, did his laundry, and even asked me to help him with his schoolwork. I was expected to assist him simply because we were family, but I never received the same consideration. While I was the quiet, introverted kid who enjoyed studying and keeping to myself, David was loud and rough, just like our dad. He would bully me relentlessly, mock me for being different, sneak into my room to read my diary, and even put stones in my cereal. When I complained to our parents, they would laugh it off, saying, "This is how brothers bond." But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what he would do to destroy my marriage. The betrayal cut so deep that it didn't just end my relationship. It shattered everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and trust. This is the story of how my own brother became my worst enemy, and how karma finally caught up with him in the most spectacular way possible. Let me paint you a picture of what my childhood was really like, because understanding the dynamic in our house is crucial to everything that happened later. I'm the older brother, let's call me Mike, and David is 3 years younger than me. From the moment David could walk and talk, it was crystal clear who the favorite was in our household. Our mother treated him like he was made of gold, while I was expected to be the responsible, mature one who never needed anything. Picture this. Every morning, Mom would wake up early to make David's favorite breakfast, chocolate chip pancakes with whipped cream. Meanwhile, I'd be pouring myself a bowl of generic cereal, getting ready for school on my own. She'd pack his lunch with love notes and his favorite snacks, while I learned to make my own sandwich by age 8. Our father worked long hours as a construction foreman, so he wasn't around much during the week. When he was home, he'd roughhouse with David, teaching him to throw a football and telling him stories about being tough. Dad always said David reminded him of himself, loud, confident, and athletic. I, on the other hand, preferred books to sports, which seemed to disappoint him. The favoritism wasn't subtle. When David needed help with homework, Mom would call me over. "Mike, come help your brother with his math." But when I struggled with something, "Figure it out yourself, you're smart enough." When David broke something, it was an accident. When I broke something, I was being careless and needed to be more responsible. I accepted this dynamic because, honestly, I was naturally independent. Maybe it was a survival mechanism, or maybe I was just wired that way. I learned to cook basic meals, do my own laundry, and handle my problems without running to Mom and Dad. In some ways, this made me stronger, but it also created a distance between me and my parents that would last for years. David, however, never learned independence. Why would he? Everything was handed to him on a silver platter. But instead of being grateful for his privileged position, he seemed to resent me for reasons I couldn't understand. It was like my very existence annoyed him. The bullying started small when we were kids. He'd hide my glasses, so I couldn't see the blackboard at school. He'd accidentally spilled juice on my homework. He'd tell Mom I was being mean to him when I asked him to stay out of my room. And every single time, our parents would side with him. "Boys will be boys," Mom would say with a laugh when David would tackle me to the ground for no reason. "David's just playing. Don't be so sensitive," she'd add when I complained about him breaking my toys. School was supposed to be my escape, but David made sure it wasn't. We went to the same elementary school, and he knew exactly which kids picked on me. Instead of having my back like a brother should, he'd join in. He'd point out my insecurities to the bullies, giving them ammunition. "Mike's scared of everything," he'd tell them. "He cries when people are mean to him." The worst part was coming home and having nowhere to turn. When I'd try to tell our parents about the bullying at school, David would interrupt with his own version of events, painting me as the problem. "Mike's just being dramatic," he'd say. "He needs to toughen up." Our mother would nod along, completely buying into David's narrative. "Maybe if you tried to fit in better," she'd suggest. "David doesn't have these problems because he knows how to get along with people." This went on for years. I learned to keep my mouth shut, to handle my problems alone, and to never expect support from my family. I threw myself into my studies because academic achievement was the one area where I could excel without interference. I was consistently at the top of my class, but even that seemed to irritate David. "Why do you have to be such a nerd?" he'd sneer when I'd get excited about a good grade. Nobody likes a show-off. The physical bullying escalated as we got older. David got bigger and stronger, and he used that advantage. He'd punch me playfully, but hard enough to leave bruises. He'd trip me in the hallways at school. He'd hide my belongings and watch me frantically search for them, laughing the entire time. The psychological warfare was even worse. David had a talent for finding exactly the right words to cut deep. He knew I was self-conscious about my height, my glasses, my quiet personality. He'd use all of it against me, especially when he was angry about something completely unrelated. "No wonder you don't have any friends," he'd say when I'd spend weekends reading instead of going out. You're just a weird loser who nobody wants to be around. Our parents' response to all of this, that's just how brothers are. You'll appreciate each other when you're older. But I knew, even as a kid, that this wasn't normal sibling rivalry. This was systematic cruelty, and David seemed to genuinely enjoy making me miserable. The worst part was that he was so charming with everyone else, teachers, neighbors, our extended family. To them, David was this wonderful, outgoing kid who could do no wrong. I became an expert at hiding my feelings, at pretending everything was fine when relatives visited. I learned to laugh off David's jokes in public while dying inside. I became the master of the fake smile, the forced laugh, the everything's great response when adults asked how things were going. By the time I was in high school, I had one goal: get good enough grades to earn a scholarship to a university far away from home. I was counting down the days until I could escape this toxic environment and build a life where David couldn't touch me. Little did I know that even when I thought I'd finally gotten away from him, he'd find a way to destroy the life I'd built from a distance. The turning point in my relationship with David came during my sophomore year of high school, and it involved fire. Literally. I was 15, David was 12, and his behavior had escalated from cruel pranks to genuinely dangerous territory. The incident that changed everything happened on a Tuesday evening when our parents were at some work function, leaving us alone for a few hours. I was in my room studying for a chemistry test, headphones on, completely absorbed in my textbook. David had been unusually quiet that evening, which should have been my first warning sign. When David was quiet, he was usually plotting something. I didn't hear him come into my room. The first thing I noticed was the smell, that sharp chemical scent of lighter fluid. By the time I looked up and pulled off my headphones, David was standing behind my chair with Dad's lighter, trying to set my hair on fire. I jerked away just in time, but not before the flame singed the back of my head. The smell of burned hair filled the room as I spun around, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and rage. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I screamed, my voice cracking with emotion. David just stood there, lighter still in his hand, with this cold, almost disappointed expression on his face, like he was annoyed that his plan hadn't worked perfectly. "I was just playing," he said with a shrug, as if attempting to set someone on fire was just another Tuesday night activity. That's when something inside me snapped. For years, I had endured his cruelty in silence, always taking the high road, always being the mature older brother. But this wasn't bullying anymore. This was attempted assault. I grabbed the lighter from his hand and shoved him hard against the wall. "You could have seriously hurt me," I yelled. "What if my whole head had caught fire? What if I'd been scarred for life?" David's response was typical. He started crying and ran to find Mom and Dad the moment they got home. When our parents walked through the door 20 minutes later, David was already in full victim mode, sobbing about how I'd been violent with him and pushed him around for no reason. He conveniently left out the part about trying to light me on fire. But this time was different. This time I had evidence. "Smell my hair," I told Dad, leaning toward him. "David tried to set it on fire with your lighter." Dad's expression changed immediately. He could smell the burned hair, could see the singed ends where the flame had touched. His face went from confusion to horror to absolute fury in about 3 seconds. "David," Dad's voice was deadly quiet, "did you try to light your brother's hair on fire?" Our mother immediately jumped to David's defense. "Oh, come on, he's just a kid. He was probably just playing around. Boys do stupid things sometimes." But Dad wasn't having it. Playing around? His voice was getting louder. He could have seriously injured his brother. What if Mike's whole head had caught fire? What if he'd been disfigured? David, seeing that his usual tactics weren't working with Dad, doubled down on the tears. "I didn't mean to hurt him. I was just joking around. Mike's being dramatic." That's when Dad said something that changed the entire dynamic in our house. "David, if you ever, and I mean ever, do something like this again, I'm calling the police. This isn't a joke. This isn't boys being boys. This is assault. You could go to juvenile detention for something like this." The room went dead silent. David's crying stopped immediately. Our mother's mouth fell open, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years: vindication. Dad continued, his voice stern and unwavering. "You think this is funny? You think hurting your brother makes you tough? Let me tell you something, son. Real men don't hurt people who can't fight back. Real men protect their family. They don't terrorize them." David was genuinely stunned. For the first time in his life, he was facing real consequences for his actions. No one was rushing to his defense. No one was making excuses for him, and Dad was looking at him like he didn't recognize his own son. Later that night, Dad came to my room to talk. I was still shaken up, still processing the fact that my own brother had tried to set me on fire. "Mike," Dad said, sitting on the edge of my bed, "I owe you an apology. I've been waiting for years, hoping David would grow out of this behavior, but I'm starting to realize he's not going to change on his own." I almost started crying, right there. After years of feeling invisible, of having my concerns dismissed, my own father was finally acknowledging what I'd been going through. I had no idea it was this bad, Dad continued. Your mother and I, we thought it was just normal sibling rivalry. But what happened tonight? That's not normal. That's not okay. I told him everything that night. Years of bullying, the incidents at school, the psychological torture, the way David seemed to take genuine pleasure in my pain. Dad listened to every word, his expression growing more troubled with each story. The next day, Dad enrolled me in MMA classes at the local gym. You need to learn to defend yourself, he told me. Not just from David, but from anyone who tries to hurt you. At first, the idea of a skinny, nerdy kid like me learning to fight seemed almost laughable, but I was motivated in a way I'd never been before. I threw myself into training with the same intensity I brought to my studies. But tudo começou a mudar quando David realized he could no longer physically intimidate me without consequences. The dynamic between us shifted, but not in the way you might expect. Instead of backing down completely, David adapted his tactics. He became more subtle, more psychological in his approach. Since he couldn't hurt me physically anymore, he focused on emotional warfare. And that's when he started paying very close attention to the relationships that mattered to me, including the girl I would eventually marry. The MMA training transformed me in ways I never expected. Within 6 months, I had gained 20 pounds of muscle. My confidence had skyrocketed, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I could stand up to anyone, including David. The first real test came about 8 months after I started training. David had stolen money from my room again, $40 I'd saved from my part-time job at the local grocery store. I caught him red-handed, counting my bills in his room. Give it back, I said, standing in his doorway. David looked up with that familiar smirk. What money? I don't know what you're talking about. But this time, instead of running to Dad or accepting defeat, I walked into his room and held out my hand. The $40 you just took from my dresser drawer. Hand it over, now. David stood up, trying to use his height to intimidate me like he always had. Or what? You gonna cry to Daddy again? That's when I punched him square in the face. David went down hard, blood streaming from his nose, my money scattering across his bedroom floor. He looked up at me with genuine shock, like he couldn't believe his punching bag had finally hit back. Next time you steal from me, I said, collecting my bills from the floor, it'll be worse. David started crying. Not the fake tears he used to manipulate our parents, but real, shocked sobs. When Mom and Dad got home and found him with a bloody nose, he immediately launched into his victim routine. But Dad surprised everyone by asking one simple question. David, did you take Mike's money? When David hesitated, Dad's expression hardened. Answer me, did you steal from your brother? I just needed it for... That's all I need to hear, Dad interrupted. Mike, good for you for standing up for yourself. David, you're lucky he only punched you once. Anyone else would have called the police for theft. Our mother was horrified. You can't be serious. Mike hit his little brother. His little brother, Dad said firmly, is a thief. And if he keeps this up, he's going to learn that actions have consequences. From that day forward, the physical bullying stopped completely. David finally understood that I wasn't the helpless victim I used to be, but instead of improving our relationship, this shift seemed to make David even more resentful. He couldn't hurt me physically anymore, so he got creative with psychological warfare. He started spreading rumors about me at school, telling people I was gay, that I had weird fetishes, that I was planning to shoot up the school. Most people didn't believe him, but the rumors were hurtful nonetheless. When I brought girls home, David would find ways to embarrass me. He'd tell them embarrassing stories from my childhood, show them pictures of me from my awkward middle school years, or make inappropriate comments that made them uncomfortable. Your brother's kind of creepy, one girl told me after David had spent an entire evening making sexual jokes and staring at her inappropriately. David also became a master of passive-aggressive behavior. He'd use up all the hot water before I could shower. He'd eat food I'd specifically bought for myself. He'd turn up his music when I was trying to study. He'd invite his loud friends over when he knew I had important tests the next day. But the worst part was how he'd act completely innocent whenever our parents were around. In front of Mom and Dad, David was the perfect little brother, helpful, polite, even affectionate toward me. It was only when we were alone that his true nature came out. Nobody will ever believe you, he told me once when I confronted him about his behavior. I'm the good son, remember? You're just the angry, violent one who hits his little brother. The psychological games intensified during my senior year of high school. I was focused on maintaining my grades for college applications, working part-time to save money, and preparing for my escape from this toxic environment. David seemed determined to sabotage every aspect of my life. He started intercepting my mail, including college acceptance letters. I only found out because my guidance counselor asked why I hadn't responded to several scholarship offers. When I confronted David, he claimed he'd accidentally thrown them away with junk mail. He also began targeting my few close friendships. David would call my friends pretending to be me, saying horrible things or canceling plans I'd made. He'd show up at places where he knew I'd be hanging out with friends, inserting himself into conversations and gradually turning people against me with subtle manipulations. "Your brother's actually pretty cool," one of my best friends told me, after David had spent an afternoon charming everyone at a party I'd brought him to. "Maybe you're too hard on him." This was David's greatest talent, his ability to be absolutely charming when it served his purposes. Teachers loved him, neighbors thought he was wonderful, and our extended family considered him the golden child. Only I saw the real David, the one who took pleasure in other people's pain. The breaking point came during my graduation party. Dad had organized a small celebration at our house with family and a few of my close friends. I was excited. This was supposed to be my moment, my celebration of finally escaping this nightmare. David waited until the party was in full swing, until everyone was relaxed and having a good time. Then he stood up to give a toast to his big brother. "I just want to say how proud I am of Mike," he began, his voice dripping with fake sincerity. "He's overcome so many challenges to get here today." I felt my stomach drop. I knew that tone, knew he was setting me up for something. I mean, it wasn't easy for him being different from other kids. The therapy sessions, the medication for his anger issues, the incident with the neighbor's cat. Every word was a lie, but David delivered them with such conviction that people started looking at me with confusion and concern. He was systematically destroying my reputation in front of everyone who mattered to me. "David," Dad's voice cut through the room like a knife. "That's enough." But David wasn't finished. "I just think it's amazing how far he's come since the incident at school with—" "I said that's enough," Dad's voice boomed across the room. The party ended awkwardly, with guests making excuses to leave early. Several people avoided eye contact with me, clearly disturbed by David's revelations. My graduation celebration, the one moment that was supposed to be mine, had been completely ruined. That night, after everyone had gone home, I found David in his room, playing video games like nothing had happened. "Why?" I asked him. "Why do you hate me so much?" David paused his game and looked at me with cold, calculating eyes. "Because you think you're better than me. You think being smart makes you special. You think Mom and Dad should love you more just because you get good grades. I never said any of that. You didn't have to say it. I can see it in the way you look at me, like I'm some kind of disappointment. Well, guess what? You're not as perfect as you think you are. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows it." That conversation haunted me as I prepared to leave for college. I realized that David's hatred wasn't about anything I'd done. It was about who I was. In his mind, my very existence was a threat to his position as the favored child. I left for university 2 weeks later, genuinely believing that distance would solve our problems. I thought that once we were living separate lives, David would move on and find other targets for his cruelty. I was wrong. Even from hundreds of miles away, David found ways to interfere with my life. He'd call my dorm room at all hours, sometimes pretending to be me and leaving disturbing messages for my roommate. He'd contact girls I was dating on social media, sending them warnings about my supposed psychological problems. But the worst was yet to come. Because when I finally found someone I truly loved, someone I wanted to build a life with, David saw the perfect opportunity for the ultimate betrayal. And this time, he wouldn't just hurt me. He'd destroy everything I held dear. College was supposed to be my fresh start, my escape from David's toxic influence. For the first time in my life, I was free to be myself without constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next cruel prank or psychological attack. I threw myself into university life with enthusiasm I'd never experienced before. I made genuine friends who appreciated my quiet intelligence, joined study groups, and even started dating. The constant anxiety that had plagued me throughout high school began to fade, replaced by something I'd almost forgotten existed: happiness. During my sophomore year, I met Karen at a fraternity party that my roommate had dragged me to. I wasn't much of a party person, but something about her drew me in immediately. She was studying psychology, had this infectious laugh, and seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. A refreshing change from the superficial conversations that dominated most college social events. Karen was beautiful in an understated way. Long brown hair, warm brown eyes, and a smile that could light up a room. But what really attracted me was her intelligence and her kindness. She listened when I talked about my studies, asked thoughtful questions, and never made me feel like I was boring or too serious. We started dating officially after about a month of hanging out. For the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to be truly happy. Karen made me feel valued, appreciated, loved in a way I'd never experienced from my own family. Our relationship progressed naturally over the next 2 years. We studied together, explored the city, talked for hours about our dreams and fears. I told her about my difficult relationship with David, though I downplayed the severity of his behavior. I didn't want her to think I came from a completely dysfunctional family. During our senior year, we discovered Karen was pregnant. Coming from religious backgrounds, having a child outside of marriage was frowned upon, but we were both excited about starting a family together. We decided to get married right after graduation, a small, intimate ceremony with just our immediate families. I was nervous about introducing Karen to David, but I couldn't avoid it forever. When we went home for Thanksgiving during our senior year, I brought her to meet my family for the first time. The moment David met Karen, I noticed something different in his behavior. For the first time in years, he was actually pleasant to me when she was around. He was charming, funny, and went out of his way to make her feel welcome. "Your brother's really sweet," Karen told me after our first family dinner. "I don't understand why you two don't get along better." I was suspicious of David's sudden change in attitude, but I was also hopeful. Maybe he was finally growing up. Maybe becoming an uncle would give him some perspective on what family really meant. Karen decided to stay with my family from Thanksgiving through New Year's, wanting to bond with them before our wedding. I thought it was a wonderful idea. I wanted her to feel accepted and loved by my family in a way I'd never experienced myself. During those weeks, Karen spent a lot of time with my mother, helping with cooking and holiday preparations. She also made an effort to include David in our activities, hoping to help bridge the gap between us. "Maybe if we all spend more time together," she suggested, "you and David can work through your issues." So when we planned movie nights, Karen would invite David to join us. We'd watch whatever he wanted to watch. And I was amazed to see him actually engaging in normal conversation with me for the first time in years. It felt like progress. I noticed that Karen and David seemed to get along particularly well. They'd play video games together, joke around, and she'd listen sympathetically when he talked about his struggles with school and relationships. I was grateful that she was making such an effort with my family. What I didn't realize was that David was playing a much longer, more devastating game than I could have imagined. The first sign that something was wrong came on New Year's Eve. Karen had been planning to stay through the holiday, but suddenly announced that she needed to go back to school early. "I just remembered I have some things I need to take care of before classes start," she said, but something in her voice seemed off. I tried to convince her to stay. We'd been looking forward to ringing in the new year together, but she was adamant about leaving. She seemed anxious, almost guilty about something, but when I asked if everything was okay, she assured me it was just stress about our upcoming graduation. When we returned to college after the holidays, Karen seemed different. She was more distant, less affectionate, and often seemed lost in thought. I attributed it to wedding stress and the pressure of our final semester. 2 weeks later, we discovered she was pregnant. We were both shocked. We'd been careful, but not perfect. After the initial surprise wore off, though, we were excited. We loved each other. We were getting married anyway, and starting our family a little earlier than planned didn't seem like the end of the world. We had a beautiful small wedding right after graduation. Our families were there, including David, who seemed genuinely happy for us. He even gave a touching speech about how proud he was to have me as a brother and how lucky Karen was to be joining our family. For a moment, standing there in my tuxedo with Karen in her wedding dress, I thought maybe we'd finally turned a corner as a family. Maybe David had really changed. Maybe we could all move forward together. I was so naive. The first few years of our marriage were wonderful. We moved to a new city for my job, bought a small house, and welcomed our son Henry into the world. I was completely devoted to both of them. Karen was my dream wife, and Henry was the light of my life. But there were signs I should have noticed. Karen would sometimes get mysterious phone calls that she'd taken another room. She'd claim they were from old college friends or work colleagues, but something about her body language seemed off. There were also the business trips that seemed to come up more and more frequently. Karen worked in marketing for a mid-sized company, and she'd often have to travel for client meetings or conferences. Sometimes these trips seemed last-minute or poorly planned, but I trusted her completely. I trusted her when she said she was working late. I trusted her when she said she needed girls' weekends to decompress. I trusted her when she said the distance she sometimes put between us was just stress from work and motherhood. Even when I discovered her first affair with a married coworker, I chose to forgive her. We went to counseling, worked through our issues, and I convinced myself it was a mistake that wouldn't happen again. When I found out about the second affair, a brief fling with an ex-boyfriend during a visit to her family, I was devastated, but I still chose to work on our marriage. I didn't want Henry to grow up in a broken home, and I genuinely believed Karen when she said she was committed to making things work. For 4 years after that second betrayal, things seemed stable. We were happy, planning our future, talking about having another child. I thought we'd overcome our obstacles and built something stronger. Then, 3 months ago, my entire world exploded. Karen came home from work one evening with a strange expression on her face. She seemed nervous, almost scared, as she asked me to sit down because she had something important to tell me. "I've been having an affair," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. My heart stopped. After everything we'd been through, after all the work we'd done to rebuild our trust, she'd betrayed me again. But then she said something that made my blood run cold. "And I think Henry might not be your son." The room started spinning. I felt like I was going to be sick. "What do you mean?" Karen's next words shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. "The affair. It's been going on for years, since before Henry was born, and it's with David." I stared at her, unable to process what she was saying. "David? My brother David?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. I never meant to hurt you." But I couldn't hear her apologies over the roaring in my ears. My wife had been sleeping with my brother. The son I'd loved and raised for 4 years might not even be mine. The two people who were supposed to love me most in the world had conspired to destroy me. How long? I managed to ask. It started that Christmas when I stayed with your family. David and we connected. He was going through a breakup and he seemed so vulnerable. We started talking and then I felt like I was drowning. Every memory from that Christmas was now tainted. Every moment I'd thought we were bonding as a family, David had been planning my destruction. And you've been seeing him this whole time? Karen nodded miserably. We'd meet when I was supposedly on business trips. Sometimes he'd come here when you were at work. I know how horrible this sounds, but I couldn't stop. There was something between us that I couldn't resist. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that I couldn't even feel angry yet. I was just numb, trying to understand how the two people I'd trusted most had been lying to me for years. Does he know? About Henry? We both suspected, but we were never sure. That's why I'm telling you now, I can't live with this secret anymore. I looked at this woman I'd loved for over a decade, this woman I'd forgiven twice before, this woman who'd given me the son I adored, and I realized I didn't know her at all. And somewhere, probably laughing about how perfectly his plan had worked, was David, the brother who'd finally found the ultimate way to destroy me. The silence that followed Karen's confession felt like it lasted forever. I sat there, staring at this woman I thought I knew, trying to process the magnitude of what she'd just told me. My wife had been having an affair with my brother for years. The son I'd raised might not be mine. Everything I'd built my adult life around was a lie. Say something, Karen whispered, her voice breaking. Please, just say something. But what was there to say? What words could possibly capture the devastation I was feeling? Instead, I stood up and walked to our bedroom, Karen following behind me, pleading. Mike, please, we can work through this. We've overcome problems before. I made a mistake, but I love you. I love our family. I pulled out a suitcase and started packing clothes. My movements were mechanical, robotic. I felt completely disconnected from my body, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. What are you doing? Karen's voice was getting more panicked. Where are you going? I don't know, I said honestly, but I can't be here right now. Karen grabbed my arm, trying to stop me from packing. If you love me, you'll fight for us. You'll fight for our marriage. Couples get through affairs all the time. I turned to look at her, and for the first time since her confession, I felt something other than numbness. I felt a cold, quiet rage. Fight for us? I said, my voice deadly calm. Karen, you've been sleeping with my brother for years. You've been lying to my face every single day. You've let me raise a child who might not even be mine. What exactly am I supposed to fight for? Our son needs his father, she said desperately. Children shouldn't be raised in broken homes. Think about Henry. That's when the anger really hit me. Don't you dare use Henry to manipulate me. You should have thought about Henry before you decided to destroy his family. I finished packing and headed for the door. Karen was crying hysterically now, begging me to stay, promising she'd end things with David, swearing it would never happen again. But I was done. After years of forgiving her betrayals, after years of trying to rebuild trust that she kept shattering, I finally understood that some things couldn't be fixed. I checked into a hotel that night and didn't sleep at all. I kept replaying every moment from the past few years, looking for signs I'd missed. The late nights, the mysterious phone calls, the business trips that seemed to happen whenever I was particularly busy with work. And David. God, David must have been laughing at me this entire time. All those family gatherings where he'd been polite to me, all those moments I'd thought we were finally getting along, he'd been sleeping with my wife the entire time. The next morning I drove straight to my parents' house. I needed them to know what their golden child had done. I needed witnesses when I confronted David. Mom and Dad were having coffee in the kitchen when I walked in. They took one look at my face and knew something was terribly wrong. Mike, what happened? Mom asked, immediately concerned. I sat down at their kitchen table. The same table where David and I had eaten countless meals as children, where he'd been coddled and protected while I'd been ignored. Karen's been having an affair, I said simply, with David, for years. Henry might not be my son. The coffee mug slipped from Mom's hand, shattering on the kitchen floor. Dad's face went completely white. That's impossible, Mom said immediately. David would never do something like that to his own brother. But Dad was studying my face carefully. Mike, are you absolutely certain about this? Karen confessed everything last night. She told me it started that Christmas when she stayed here, and it's been going on ever since. Mom was shaking her head frantically. No, there has to be some mistake. David's not capable of something like this. Call him, I said. Call him right now and put it on speaker. Let me talk to him while you both listen. Dad nodded grimly and dialed David's number. When David answered, he sounded cheerful and relaxed. Hey, Dad, what's up? David, I said, taking the phone. Karen told me everything. There was a long pause. Told you what? About the affair. About Henry. About how you've been sleeping with my wife for years. David's voice changed immediately, becoming defensive and angry. I don't know what you're talking about. Karen's lying if she said something like that. So you're denying it? Of course I'm denying it. Why would I sleep with your wife? That's disgusting. But then I played my trump card. She told me it started that Christmas when she stayed here. She told me about the hotels you'd meet at. She told me about the business trips that were really romantic getaways. Another long pause. Then David's voice came back, but it was different now. Colder, more calculating. Okay, so what if it's true? It's not like you were satisfying her anyway. She came to me because you're boring and pathetic. I just gave her what she needed. I heard Mom gasp in the background. Dad's face had turned red with fury. You slept with your brother's wife? I said, making sure my parents could hear every word. You helped her lie to me for years. You let me raise a child who might not even be mine. Hey, that's not my fault if you're too stupid to figure out what was happening right under your nose, David said with a laugh. Besides, I'm the better-looking brother anyway. Can you really blame her for choosing me? That's when Dad grabbed the phone from me. David, Dad's voice was shaking with rage. What you've done is unforgivable. You've betrayed your brother. You've destroyed his marriage. And you've shown that you have no honor, no decency, no respect for family. Dad, come on, it's not that big a deal. It's not a big deal? Dad's voice was getting louder. You slept with your brother's wife. You're cut off, David. Completely cut off. No more money, no more support, nothing. The line went quiet for a moment, then David started backpedaling frantically, trying to explain himself, trying to shift blame to Karen, trying to minimize what he'd done. But it was too late. The truth was out, and there was no taking it back. So here we are, 5 months later, and I'm sitting in my own apartment, a place that's truly mine for the first time in my adult life. It's quiet here, peaceful in a way I'd forgotten was possible. No drama, no lies, no walking on eggshells, wondering what betrayal is waiting around the corner. The paternity test confirmed what we all suspected. Henry is David's son, not mine. I won't lie to you, that news hit me harder than anything else in this entire nightmare. For 4 years, I loved that little boy with everything I had. I taught him to ride a bike, read him bedtime stories, celebrated his first steps and first words. Losing him feels like losing a piece of my soul. Karen has been relentless in trying to get me to maintain contact with Henry. He shouldn't be punished for our mistakes, she keeps saying. You're the only father he's ever known. But every time I look at him, I see David's eyes staring back at me. And it's like reopening the wound all over again. Maybe that makes me selfish, but I need space to heal before I can even think about what role, if any, I want to play in that child's life. The divorce was finalized 2 months ago. Karen tried to fight for alimony, claiming she'd given up career opportunities to support my ambitions. Her lawyer painted me as the cold, unforgiving husband who abandoned his family over a mistake. But adultery is adultery, and the affair with David played heavily in my favor. She walked away with far less than she'd hoped for. As for David, well, karma has been working overtime on that front. After Dad cut him off financially, he had to drop out of college. He couldn't afford the tuition, couldn't get loans without a co-signer, and suddenly discovered that a lifetime of being handed everything had left him completely unprepared for the real world. He and Karen are living together now, trying to raise Henry on David's mechanic salary. According to my cousin, who still keeps tabs on the family drama, they fight constantly. Turns out that when your relationship is built on betrayal and sneaking around, it doesn't translate well to domestic bliss and shared responsibility. David has been calling family members, begging for money, trying to get someone, anyone, to convince our parents to forgive him. But Dad meant what he said about cutting him off completely. The will has been changed, leaving everything to me with the stipulation that David gets exactly $1, just enough to prove he wasn't forgotten, but was deliberately excluded. 2 weeks ago, David called me directly for the first time since everything exploded. He was crying, which I honestly never thought I'd hear again. He told me how everyone had turned against him, how he couldn't afford basic necessities, how Karen was pressuring him for child support he couldn't provide. I need your help, he said through his tears. I know I messed up, but we're family. You have to help me. I laughed, actually laughed out loud at the audacity of it all. David, I said, you spent our entire childhood making my life hell. You bullied me, tormented me, and made me feel worthless for years. Then, when I finally built a life I was proud of, you destroyed it in the most devastating way possible. You slept with my wife, let me raise your child thinking he was mine, and showed absolutely no remorse until there were consequences. But I'm your brother. No, I interrupted. Brothers don't do what you did to me. You made your choice when you decided to betray me. Now you get to live with the consequences. I hung up and blocked his number. I'm done being David's victim, done being manipulated by tears and family obligations. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. My relationship with my parents has actually improved dramatically. Dad and I go golfing every weekend now, and he treats me more like a friend than a son. It's the relationship I always wanted but never thought I'd have. Mom struggles more with David's exile. He was her baby after all, but she's respected Dad's ultimatum and hasn't contacted him. I've been going to therapy, working through years of trauma and betrayal. My therapist says I have trust issues, which honestly made me laugh. Of course I have trust issues. My own family spent decades teaching me that the people closest to you are the ones most likely to hurt you, but I'm healing. Slowly, carefully, but genuinely healing. I got promoted at work 2 months ago, which came with a significant salary increase. I'm thinking about buying a house, maybe getting a dog. Simple pleasures that feel revolutionary after years of walking through a minefield. I'm not dating anyone yet. I'm not sure I'm ready to trust someone with my heart again. But for the first time in my life, I'm genuinely happy being alone. I've learned that peace is worth more than companionship, that solitude is better than toxic relationships. So that's my story, Reddit. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. But sometimes, if you're strong enough to walk away, you can build something better from the ashes. What do you think? Have any of you dealt with family betrayal like this? How did you move forward? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.